The Fresh, Jewfish by the Ton by Geoff Doig. Firstly, the definition of a fresh in northern New South Wales major river systems back in the early yesteryears with the locals simply meant a river in heavy flood. It also meant to all the serious big Mulloway fishermen to dust off your big centerpin reel or alvey sidecast, load up your spool, pull out your heavy-duty Dewey stick and get ready to do battle. Geoff was one of the 4 who fished in this particular fresh in the summer of 73. Geoff states when talking about that day, "I'll go through it firsthand, step by step as I still recall it clearly. It was an event never to be repeated as far as catching big Mulloway. One after the other in a fresh on the southern wall of the Southwest Rocks Breakwall at the mouth of the Macleay River in northern New South Wales. So Alex, Julius, myself, Barry Oxford and Kevin Eckles decided on a trip up to Hat Head, just south of Southwest Rocks. Soon enough, they learnt from the local Kempsey AM radio station that the Clarence River at Yamba and Macleay River, Southwest Rocks, were in flood. Immediately, all 4 fishermen start thinking the same thing as soon as the broadcast was deployed. Oh shit, the Macleay will be in fresh and it's just up the road," Geoff states. Alex nods as he does. Alex was on it. The others, not too sure, were only in hope of what could happen. Excited, a plan was put in place. Daily, we would make the drive over to the Macleay River mouth to check conditions as the weather started to abate. You could drive your car almost to the end of the southern rock wall, Geoff recalls. On our first drive over to check conditions, we saw everything and anything spewing out of the Breakwall river mouth. Blown up dead cows, half farmhouses, barns and debris you could almost walk over. Still floating out to sea rapidly. The swell was still big, rising up, then dropping back down its own tracks as the full force of the fresh held the waves up. Almost every living creature and fish that once sheltered in the Macleay was being or was already flushed out to sea. We had run across from the Hat 3 days straight, checking conditions, and saw the blue water line meeting the outgoing brown fresh still out very wide off the breakwall. Each day it was getting closer to the river mouth. We had the timing perfect, and on the 3rd day, Alex and the rest of us were armed up and ready with big gear and baits. On arriving that morning, we just knew it was going to happen. The day before, we jagged mullet around the Milo factory at Smithtown, so we had plenty of 1.5 to 2 pound or 1 kilo fresh bull mullet. I'd also brought with me another 12-foot Butterworth blank rod that I had built with a 6.5-inch deep spool sidecast alvey, 40-pound mono line mounted on a low winch mounting, typically for side casting reels such as those alveys. Why I mention this? Well, that story comes up soon. The 3rd day. Today's the day. We arrive at the southern breakwall about 150 yards from the end and we get a flat tyre. We all get out of the car and I just call out, "I smell Jewfish." Mulloway have a distinct smell when the fresh water mixed with salt water and light onshore southeast winds. That smell came straight to me and I knew we were on. I baited up before they had the wheel off the EH and ran to the northeast corner of the breakwall and swung my alvey centerpin and big bully mullet into the still outgoing fresh water. I then, while pulling off possibly 80 metres of line, hopped across the boulders and over to the southeastern side of the breakwall, a mere 10 metres away, and held off, not letting any more line out. I then held my rod tip as low to the water as possible, letting out this 80-odd metres of slack line as quickly as the outflowing water would take it, and it caused a huge bow in the line from the bobby cork to where I held off on the southeastern side corner of the breakwall. This caused the bow in the line to tighten up with the outgoing fresh and caused the bobby cork and the mullet to be trolled across the surface of the water by the tightening bow in the line. I wanted to keep the mullet up on the surface where all the schooling mullet were still battling the surging fresh. Before the boys had changed the flat tyre, I was hooked up and running past them at the car and down the rock wall to jump onto the beach and do battle with a good 50-plus pounder. It would not have been 15 minutes after I baited up that I hooked up. I remember they were pissed off that I'd left them with a flat tyre. I was the youngest by 3 to 5 years and always got hammered anyway by the crew. I was there to catch Big Dewey and the clock was ticking. If the fish were hooked on the southeast corner of the wall, where most of the bait was held up, and the Dewey ran straight out to the southeast, then it was better to fight the fish from the beach. So I'm 80 metres down the southern side of the wall, where it met the beach. I'd run down the wall, letting line out as I still wanted to keep pressure on the fish, and then scramble down onto the beach, and ran due south along the beach a good distance, playing the fish as I went. I then, when I thought I was far enough down the beach, I'd sit down, plant my feet in the sand, and do battle. The further away from the breakwall, the better, and a much safer way to land your fish on sand. After a big Mulloway's second run, they're pretty much spent. Gaffing big fish off a breakwall with swell can be sketchy, at the least, let alone landing the fish. And so it was. All the others immediately used that same rig, and we possibly made history for that one-day Jewfish Bonanza on rod and reel, fishing our second only fresh. The great part of the day was the teamwork. Besides me running off, leaving them with the flat tire initially, switching from fishing to gaffing each other's fish on that day. Gaffing is fun in itself. Gaffing a fish that size and fighting a fish that size is almost one and the same. Both catching and gaffing are a big part of the experience. You could never let your buddy down with a bad gaff shot or a miss. Once that was done, you left your mate, gaff and fish, and ran as fast as you could back to rebait your rod and cast into that last day of outsurging fresh to get hooked up once again, almost immediately. And that we did in rotating concession. Now here's one of the best parts of the day, and I recall it clearly because I was on the end of what went down. I went back to my faithful bobby cork, 2-hook rig, and bully mullet for bait. To shorten this all up, I did the usual. Cast off the north end of the breakwall into the outgoing current and let the line out as I had been doing. Then I'd go to the southeastern side to hold off on the bowed line to drag my bobby cork and mullet across the surface. The bobby cork was coming around the front quickly due to the tightening bow in the line, myself holding off but winding in very slowly at times to speed up the trolled mullet. Then suddenly the rod was almost torn out of my hands, and I look out to see this monster Mulloway in midair. I thought I was hooked up on this thing. What had happened was the bobby cork coming around a little quicker than usual across the surface because I was retrieving the bowed line. The big fish had crashed the bobby cork and it was clenched in its mouth and not letting go. It totally cleared the water on the initial bite, coming straight up underneath the bobby cork and would have been every bit of 80 pounds. I saw the whole thing happen and couldn't believe its size. The fish tore a line from my center pin whilst palming the spool with my right hand. Then obviously releasing what it had in its mouth, spat it out after about 20 seconds. But the sight of that I'll never forget. It was the size of that fish that totally freaked me out. Why didn't he crack my bait? Just kept rolling around in my head and haunted me for months. Its teeth marks were embedded in either side of the bobby cork, and these bobby corks were shaped out of corked hand lines about 8 inches or 20 centimetres long, which we'll see in some of the photos. The sun was setting in about 1 hour. On the next drift after that huge Mulloway spat the cork, a 64-pound Mulloway nailed my bait, and once again off the southeastern corner and headed seaward. I ran as I did on 8 other occasions to the beach to fight the fish. There was only one fish I'd landed that day, inside the wall, when the outgoing fresh had almost stopped due to the first tide arriving near the mouth of the river. The fish ran upriver. That 64-pounder was landed off the beach, as most were. I forget who gaffed it, but it may have been Kevin Eckles. Dragging the fish back solo as the gaffer, he rushed back to the wall to bait up himself and get back in amongst that final hour's fishing. I did get back in time to the car for one last bait up and drift. Immediately as the bobby cork and bait got midway around the front of the wall, holding off as I did, crash, bang, and wow, this was like none of the other fish I connected with. It went deeper, and at first I thought it was a shark. Fortunately, it soared around east-southeast, but I did the usual and ran like hell down the wall to the beach. The reason I ran quicker than ever was the fish was heading seaward, more easterly, and there could have been the possibility of him swimming more to the northeast, and that's exactly what the fish did. I was up the beach further than I'd run usually because I could see that the line was now pointing across the southern wall under the sea level, but extremely close to the tip of the southeast corner of the rocky wall. In these freshers, we all use heavy line on our center pins, and I had 60-pound Mako mono, a much harder line that could withstand a little bit more abrasion from rocks, better than other monos. By this time, I almost had the fish around the southeast corner of the wall, but not completely. I made the decision to point the bone, which is just walk backwards slowly and further south along the beach, not even holding the rod up. It was bust or dragged the almost expelled big fish around the wall onto a safe and sandy bottom off the southern side of the wall. I couldn't believe it, and he came around very slowly, and it could have gone bad either way. I then backed off completely on the pressure and held my rod up to absorb the head shakes of the fish. Now knowing he was now on sand, but also knowing my line had surely rubbed on the breakwall corner, which I had felt, and now I took it very easy. The end result you'll see in this pictorial. Alex said it didn't go over 70 pounds, but for some reason, that's what I remember when I weighed it back at Jordan's, the local pro fish show at Hat Head. It doesn't really matter anyway. Any Mulloway over 40 pounds is considered a big fish. But the beautiful thing about this trip was the fishing with top mates. We all caught fish, and it was a great team effort. We were all members of the Sydney Mascot Anglers Club. We caught our two biggest fish an hour apart just before sunset. Check out the front cover of Australian Angler in May 1974. I ate the biggest Jewfish cutlet off that last big fish that I've ever attempted to eat that night. No way I could finish it. Not even half the cutlet would fit on a plate. And big Mulloway do taste good, if they're not riddled with worms, which many are. This one, our biggest fish, didn't have a worm in it. That was the best fresh we all ever fished. We did have success at Yamba and Stockton breakwalls and other freshers, but nothing matched this, and probably still hasn't today. It was just one of those once-in-a-lifetime catches. That Southwest fresh, we caught an amazing 22 fish for 1,028 pounds in total. The following day, the fresh had slowed down enough for the second high tide to re-enter the river, and we only caught one fish. The night after the first day of the catch, the first high tide re-entered the river mouth. All small fish and big fish initially flushed from the river dispersed back upriver to their usual habitat. Sean Dixon, a mascot angler in Sydney, heard of the first day's catch, jumped in his car to arrive the following morning only to find the fish had moved upriver. I think even still today, no one has come close to a catch of Mulloway like that first day. Well, not off the rocks or the beach, or any breakwall, that is. Fishing's always doing your homework, considering weather and wind, and waves, the elements, and knowing absolutely everything about your target species, as well as sourcing local knowledge. That's how we found out where we could catch our mullet, which was at the Milo Factory hot water outlet at Smithtown, which was sheltered up in a small tributary. We could have fished into the night that first day, but we had no more room in the car to put our fish. Nor did we need any more. We were all shot ducks, exhausted. So it was really only one day's fishing. Only one fish the following day, which we knew was hardly worth the effort. We knew the next tide, that night of the first day, all the fish would start moving back upriver and in a hurry, which they did. Our timing was spot on. When leaving that day, we filled the back of the 1964 E.H. Holden station wagon, back seat laid down and full to the roof with Jewfish. Jordan, the local pro fisherman at Hat Head, took the fish off our hands. I'd caught a total of 9 fish that first day. We all caught solid fish. My last 2 fish in the last hour of daylight were my 2 biggest Jewies to date. And they capped off the Jewfish haul of a century, I reckon.